All right, you're good to go.
All right, can everybody see that okay? So thank you for hosting this to Brian Topp and the Missoula Architecture and Design community. Like Brian said, we're hoping to have use this to have a chance to check in on the design excellence overlay and answer questions, provide clarifications, talk through issues and challenges, and get feedback. And so we definitely are planning on devoting time for that. I did want to give a presentation just to kind of set this up and kind of have a chance to use this as a learning tool. You know, this is being recorded, so this is something that could be accessed after this conversation. And so I'm hoping that both the presentation and conversation can be something that's referenced by people that aren't necessarily here either. So feel free to pass this along afterwards. And I'm gonna, I'll just ask for the presentation, we kind of hold off on questions and then get into the discussion after that. I'm aiming to not go longer than 20 minutes. So Brian, help me stay honest on that if that works for you.
All right, I will try. And then also if you have questions, a good way to, I'll be monitoring the chat as well. So if you have specific questions in the chat, you can provide them there as well.
Yep, definitely. And there's the raise your hand tool you can use as well. So I'll just start things off on kind of a overview of the design excellence overlay in the program. This is kind of the things that I'm hoping to go through today. I wanted to just kind of give everyone, you know, the basic background of the overlay, why it was adopted and what the strategy was. Talk about what's in it as far as especially the standards and guidelines and how they relate. I want to talk about our review processes and the different tiers of that, and give you some kind of a check-in on the design excellence projects that we've seen to date. I'd like to give kind of a tour of the materials and application materials and what's out there to use for those of you who may be working on a project in the overlay in the future, and then open it up for questions and conversation. So as a background on the design excellence overlay was a council initiated project, and in a large part it was a response to community concerns about development in Missoula that were perceived, at least by some, as not necessarily in line with Missoula's character, but it was also a way to it was addressed when kind of the issue of design was raised to the forefront, and this was seen also as a way to also promote development that kind of celebrates Missoula's character, and as a mechanism for implementing some of the recommendations that we have in the growth policy and that we've gotten in other plans, such as the downtown plan over the last few years, and so and that was kind of the push that started the process going. The overlay, in a nutshell, it provides it's kind of almost a hybrid between a plan and a regulatory system, and so it includes almost a plan or a vision for development and design and urban form in certain areas of Missoula, including the larger downtown area and commercial corridors. One of the big changes of the overlay is that it's a shift from these kind of use-based development standards to a place-based approach. Typical zoning standards are are you building a commercial or a residential or a shop or something like that, and this is aimed more at where in Missoula you're building and what the vision is for that area. And then the way that the overlay is set up is that it's a management system that includes zoning standards, design guidelines, different review levels based on thresholds, and a set of incentives. So you know, to kind of understand the overlay, I think it's helpful to go back over the strategy. So again, you know, it was place-based and used these different contexts, which ended up being the sub-districts. It looked at applying more rigorous standards to more sensitive contexts. So you see kind of for these design issues, you know, for certain corridors or downtown types that some are, you know, have a high level of interest, more so than some other areas. And then the, you know, strategy adopted this combination use of both zoning standards that are prescriptive, kind of your typical checkbox, check off the list zoning standards. They're measurable, they're easy to communicate, they provide a certainty of what's expected, along with design guidelines, which are qualitative. They're harder to evaluate, they're discretionary, but they also allow for flexibility and creativity. And, you know, again, we looked at applicability by threshold, so the scale of the project or the location of which sub-district it would be in. And then we included a series of incentives that play a role in you know, trying to attract development and high use, high intensity development to the overlay that will help achieve the vision in those areas. And those include waivers to parking or exemptions to parking, allowing parking requirements to be met by using on-street parking, landscaping and activity area reductions, and then this ability to vary from standards in the overlay through an administrative process, which is called design variations, and we'll talk more about that too. And so that's kind of the basic strategy that the overlay is based on. And you know, the final product was the overlay itself, which was adopted into Title 20, and those are the zoning standards. The specific code is here. There's 3 total kind of sub chapters in the zoning that were adopted, and then the overlay was applied on the map. And again, you know, the greater downtown area, and then many of our key commercial corridors in the city. And an approach for how and when we would apply a more comprehensive level of review based on thresholds. And so, you know, the threshold process, you know, kind of gets into the 2 different review processes that are involved in the overlay. One is the zoning compliance review, and that's basically the review for zoning standards only, just as you would for any other development project that for the zoning standards that apply in that zoning district. And then the next level or tier of review is called design excellence review, and that includes review also for the design manual and the guidelines of the manual. So this is kind of a breakdown of how those 2 processes work or have been administered. This is just kind of the basic breakdown, but you know, under zoning compliance review, this is for those projects that are under a certain square footage or not in the downtown, you know, that don't have triggers that would otherwise require the additional design excellence review. And these are, you know, it's your typical building permit review. So if you want or are interested to have a pre-application meeting, you can. You would, you know, and then your building permit is reviewed for those overlay standards, along with all the other zoning that would be reviewed for. The design excellence review is a new process for us. And, you know, to be honest, most of the design excellence projects that we've seen have included this level of review, which includes basically looking at both the zoning standards and the guidelines in the manual. So that at this point, you know, we don't require a pre-application meeting. We certainly recommend it. but the first step in this would be to submit your design excellence review application and reach approval for that, and then your building permit would be reviewed based on that approval. There's also an option or a possibility of let's see here, sorry. My computer got away from me there, sorry about that. There's also a side possibility of being referred or wanting to take your application to the design review board. That's something that we have not seen yet, but it is written into the overlay and is an option. And I'm hoping to talk more about that and get feedback on that as part of our conversation later too. So as part of the permitting process, there is a provision in the overlay that allows for what are called design variations. These are not a variance. They're meeting a standard, and it's only for standards in the overlay, but it's the ability to meet a standard in an alternate way. And basically, we evaluate it as whether it is as good or better as what's required in the standard based on the design manual. It is something that and that is a trigger or threshold that would require a design excellence review. So also review for the design manual. So the manual itself is kind of the other component of this overlay. It includes qualitative and discretionary guidelines. It's broken up into kind of a explanation of it, and then a section for the downtown sub-districts, and then the corridor sub-districts, and then signs as well. And the benefit of the manual is that it provides flexibility and allows for creativity within these kinds of in line with the vision set out in the overlay. And I'll just say, maybe I'll just say this now, that the benefit that I see of this approach, and this goes back to kind of the conversations and issues that came up that led to adopting this in the first place, is that design is very difficult to talk about, and like Brian was saying earlier, different people have different ideas. Many of them are very strong opinions, but there's generally no right answer, or at least it's not easy to determine what one is. And so the benefit of this, to me, is that we've adopted kind of this document which provides a shared language. It's based on a vision that was in line and communicated on by the community. And so whether or not we agree or different people, how it's received is how it was intended. We can at least talk about and evaluate it based on this shared set of expectations and criteria and language. So to me, that's a benefit of this program. I just want to run through this really quickly. The manual and the guidelines are we really recommend that they be approached in a way that is tiered, kind of from the very general to the very specific. And so, informing this whole program and this whole document are these overarching design principles. There are 9 of them: design for Missoula, encourage architectural diversity, connect to nature, respect traditions, engage the public realm, support economic benefits, implement the growth policy, and focus inward, and implement area plans. And so these are the big ideas of what we are wanting to see accomplished through this overlay. Kind of focusing or drilling down, there are kind of specific design goals and characteristics that are incorporated into the overlay, and that's kind of listed on this left side here. And these are pretty basic. There's street level interest, traditional compatibility with traditional character, street edge character, materials. But as we talked about before, they are received a different level of focus or a different type of focus in the different sub-districts in the overlay. And so these are what we call the key design considerations. And then once you get to the guidelines themselves, the manual is mainly devoted to a series of guidelines that are broken down by category, like building orientation has specific guidelines that it's looking to meet as they, if applicable. And so as part of this, I just want to try to kind of convey that, this is an approach that's in the manual, and we use to evaluate how guidelines are being met, how design variations should be evaluated, which is basically this kind of drilling down that, if there's confusion what the design guideline means, well, maybe it's informed by this next level up, by the intent statement for that section. Maybe that's informed by the key design considerations for the sub-district, and maybe that's informed by just the guiding principles overall. So that's kind of a hierarchy that we use in the to review, and we recommend using yourselves. So if I'm doing okay on time, I'd like to do a quick tour of the applications and materials. That sound okay?
Yep, you're looking good.
All right. So there's two main sources for this. We have a web page devoted to design excellence. That's MissoulaDesignExcellence.org. It'll take you to a city web page, but their link, that URL will work. And then the standards themselves are included with Title 20, so they're accessed through the Muni Code site for Title 20. So I'm gonna just break out of this presentation for a second and kind of give you a quick tour of this. So this is the Design Excellence webpage, which has kind of an overview. It has links to the documents, the manual, a map of the overlay, a link to Muni Code. The Muni Code this is the Muni Code site, and the standards themselves are in chapter 20, 40, 180. And unfortunately, the way that Muni Code is set up, it's not very easy to navigate within Muni Code to the subsections of this code. And the code, it's a long set of standards. And so, one recommendation for kind of making this more user-friendly is that you do get the approved ordinance from this page for now, and that looks, let's see if I can, oh, that's the map. That'll look like this, and this is a PDF, and it's hyperlinked and everything. So you can jump through this more easily than you can through Muni Code. Just as a brief kind of review of this, the 2025-080 is the general chapter, and it'll include the intent of the overlay and the original kind of conceptual maps that it was based on. This applicability section is very important to kind of be familiar with. It has provisions of when the overlay itself applies or doesn't, as well as guidance on when the how the overlay fits in with the rest of Title 20. So there are sections in Title 20 that don't apply here that you would want to double check and make sure that you are accounting for. The section B of this is all about the review process. This is where the chart that determines at what level or threshold a project would go from just your typical zoning compliance review to design excellence review, and that's here. You know, basically that's based on place. So if you're in a certain sub-district, you're, for example, all of downtown design excellence review is required. Certain typology or corridors, it's required no matter what, typology 1. Otherwise, it's based on a square footage of the project. And then there are some other triggers or thresholds, including the design variation, conditional use, if you're in a node, that kind of thing. And then the section in this code that I really want to make a plug for during this as well is section C, so 2025-080C. And this is meant to be used interactively with the specific sub-district standards that are in the other chapters. So the other subsections, 2025-081 is the downtown, you know, you've got your downtown inner core. This is basically just the numbers that you need for your zoning standards. It's a 2-page section. It has more or less what you need to know for what the zoning requirements are for that sub-district. But any questions that you have on what it is, how it's numbered, what it's for, you know, each one of these standards has a full intent section, measurement section, you know, additional detail that is in this 2025-080C section. So please just keep that one in mind. It'll answer a lot of questions that may come up as you're using this. It's got explanations, applicabilities, the specific standards themselves, and so there's a lot of information in there, and it's meant to be used in combination with the subsection chapters. And finally, in the zoning is the list of incentives. That's at the end of the general chapter, 2025-080D. Again, you know, these are in the zoning, so they apply automatically, given, you know, that it meets the standard. So there's quite a few reductions, potential reductions for parking requirements, and the non-street parking substitution and whatnot. So just another section to make sure that you're aware of. And then moving on to the manual, that's also available, and I'm not going to go through that too much except to say that it is broken down again by the downtown and the corridors, and each has its own introduction, description of the design context, and then the individual guideline types for site design and building design. There's also, we also have a, let's see, on the Design Excellence webpage, there's a Design Excellence review page, and that has links to the application materials. Once you kind of determine that your project requires Design Excellence review, the application materials that we look for are the Design Excellence review checklist, and if applicable, if you're requesting design variations, this request form. I'll just open up a checklist here. Actually, I had it already. This is what the checklist looks like, and you know, there's room. It's a fillable form. It's room for project information, applicant information. There's a sheet in here that's instructions of how to fill in the different columns. And so that is helpful. There's also on the web page a separate document that has more complete instructions, and then it's, you know, and then it goes on from there. I know that it's a long document. We've definitely received feedback on that. I'm looking forward to talking through some more on that and ideas you have for streamlining it. I will just point out that every one of these guideline types has an NA box. If none of the guidelines apply, just check that box and move on to the next one. If only one of your guidelines applies, just use the NA column for any others that don't apply, and you don't need to spend any additional time or thought on those guidelines. I also would recommend again that during a pre-application meeting, that's a good time to kind of troubleshoot and identify which and whether certain guidelines apply or not, and whether that's something you really need to be spending time focusing on or not. And then just the last kind of document here to look at is the design variation request form. It's a pretty simple document. Again, it's a fillable form. We want to know what specific zoning standard would be varied from. Again, these are only apply to the standards within the overlay. And then, this description, what we're really looking for of how the intent is being met is how are you meeting the intent of the specific standard as it's described in 2025-080C in that long kind of subsection in the general chapter, along with how it relates to specific guidelines that are applicable. And that's where I would kind of go back to that tiered hierarchy of kind of specific to general. So that's kind of the approach we look for and how we would want to evaluate those. And then
you're about 20 minutes in.
Okay, I'm just about there. That's my tour, and I just wanted to throw these numbers at you, just as kind of an update. So, these numbers are not 100% accurate, but for the best of my ability to tally, leading up to this, we've received or been in contact about around 33, applications. These are all projects that involve the design excellence review, and this is from when the overlay was adopted. It's the last year and a half or so. 70% of those have been completed and approved. 15% are currently under review. There's about 10% that we're in pre-application talks with, and then there are 2 cases that were withdrawn from applying. This is a kind of a breakdown of how many of the projects that have been approved requested design variations or not. It's about a 50-50 split. The feedback that I've kind of gotten from our staff is that typically the bigger the project, the more complicated the project, the more likelihood that there is for design variation. Design variations, another thing I'm hoping to talk through and get and hear more feedback on. And then this is just a kind of a breakdown of where these projects have been occurring. 30% of them are in the inner core. That's the downtown area. In between the inner core and outer core, almost 45% in the downtown. And then, some in some sub-districts have not seen any projects, and then kind of equally distributed throughout the corridors. And that's kind of what I had in mind. And I'd like to thank we have some of our staff members who are involved with reviewing these projects. And I'm hoping that they are able to participate and probably answer some questions that come up more accurately than I can. And thanks all for everybody who's here to take the time to do this. And we're looking forward to hearing what thoughts you have.
All right, with that, we'll kind of open it up. I think I want to steer the conversation a little bit for kind of some general ideas here. So I think to start off with, are there any, are there any major kind of issues with understanding the process or understanding or the intent and that sort of thing? Just generally, like kind of bigger overview of what what Ben presented and what you guys have gone through. I think maybe thinking about timelines and overlapping of other reviews that are required, zoning and building permit, that type of thing. I honestly haven't gone through it, so I'm kind of opening that up to the people that have gone through it, positive experience, negative experience, whatever, how it's impacting your project specifically, or the owner, I guess, in kind of planning stages of a project.
I've worked in different cities as a designer, and I think what is happening in Missoula right now is really exciting. I think it looks really organized and well thought out. I have a favorite set of code that I love. It's from Clifton Park, so I'll attach a link to that. And I'm just curious about how it's going for staff and how the design review board is working so far. And just generally, though, it looks like it's really well done. It's been I know it's been a lot of work to get to this point, and it's cool to see what you've done.
I have a thought. Can everyone hear me?
Yeah.
So I've gone through the review process twice, and I think overall it was really great. I appreciate the document very much. You know, I share the collective sense that design in this community was going astray a little bit, and I think that this document is a fantastic start to corral in some of the unfortunate development that has been going on. And I think overall, long term, this is going to be very important. The one thought that I had, and I think I've communicated this to Caitlin before, but the 2 times that I went through it, I really feel that there needs to be an informal way in which the designer or architect is pitching the design to staff, because on both occasions, it didn't seem like the full design concept or intent was really understood to a great level of clarity. And there's, you know, for instance, I would never design a building or pitch a building to a client and never share it either face-to-face or via Zoom. I would never just send them drawings and have them understand or try to understand it, because it's almost impossible to do so. I've tried that in the past, and it's been very unsuccessful. The clients tend to read between the lines and not really understand the direction. And so my most successful projects has come when I'm able to sit in a room, or in these times over Zoom, and explain the history, why things are done. And there ultimately still might be a disagreement on whether it meets the design guides or not, but you start further down the road by being able to talk about the design before it sort of goes in for full review by staff. I think that would be something that me personally would really enjoy, because it would be a conversation about the project before there's a determination on whether it does or does not meet the guidelines. So
yeah, I'd have a question for you, Ben, on that too. You have the pre-application process in other communities that I've worked in. That pre-application meeting is a little bit more informal, and it kind of lets you do that, lets you kind of showcase the design and talk about the design intent with the reviewers, and then you're kind of on somewhat solid standing before you actually go in for your official review, and you kind of know what maybe the issues they're looking at that maybe you might need to adapt to, or that there might be a disagreement on. So in relation to that.
Yeah, I can respond to both of those. Just, somewhat. For one thing, yeah, I think one of the ways that we'd like to use the pre-application meeting for something like that, where we are walked through the project and get an understanding of it, and have a chance, before all this was happening, get a chance to sit down face to face and have it explained to us. So that, that is something that we would, look forward to and look for in the pre-app. This kind of gets in, so I'll just kind of talk a little bit more about how we've been doing our reviews, and it might kind of get to this a little bit too. But we, since this has been adopted, we've been evolving, and we've kind of changed our, updated or modified our processes along the way. And currently the way that kind of the approach that we have is to kind of convene. We have like a regular group on our end that includes all of the project planners, all the reviewing planners that would be involved with this, and then some additional members that we see as resources and helpful, that have expertise and experience and skills and things that help to evaluate projects like this and based on this program. And so so that's one element, and then the other is kind of figuring out at what point an application transitions from being a pre-application kind of talking through things informally to a formal application where where it's we've been presented with a plan, and now we're making a call on whether it passes or not. And I think we've left that transition fairly flexible. But I mean, and to me that seems beneficial or helpful in a way that it's open to kind of that ability to have an informal conversation, more of a feedback, more of a dialogue, I guess, than to have your kind of standard review process where you're checking whether it either meets the standard or it doesn't. The tricky thing about it is that I think it can be maybe confusing or can lead to some lack of clarity on where things are at in the process, and what's a suggestion, what's a requirement, what's a that kind of thing. And so I'd be curious to hear how what's preferable. In some situations maybe it would be more to the point and faster to just kind of after a pre-app or once just ask for an application and do a full review and then give you back our response and go from there. The one of the challenges for us on that is that there might be it might be clear that there's going to be some evolution on a project. It'd be a lot easier to just talk it through and not have to do a full review on our end, which is pretty time consuming, and I don't know how much it helps everybody at the end of the day. So I don't know. Does that go anywhere?
I think so. I guess what I'm proposing is a way in which, when that informal conversation happens, because on both projects I did do a pre-app meeting, but I guess you call it a PRT meeting, right? And on both I had the PRT meeting, and it tended to be more code related, and there was engineering, planning, and zoning there, or engineering, building, and planning. But when the design is finally done, it seems a little odd that you send the whole package in and you have a whole staff review it and spend all that time without having the architect kind of explain the design before you review it. So I think it almost would save you time if there was a 20-minute meeting where when the design is finalized, you do want to go through full review, that there's a small meeting that talks about and talks through the design, because it's nuanced, as you said, Ben. Design, there's a lot of minutia and nuanceness to the design, and I think if there was a way which you could just start off and say, here's the intent, these are the reasons why we're doing these things, you at least have the history behind it and you understand that before reviewing it. I guess that's what I'm proposing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This is Val. If I could just jump in for a minute. I think that reminds us, Brandon, to ourselves, to staff, to say, if we're not hearing somebody speak about the overall intent, that we ask that, that in our process, we also can learn from what you're talking about and step back and say, well, here are the details, but also tell us what you're trying to accomplish here. What is your overall vision? What is your overall intent? And kind of get that into our frame of mind. And that will help to sort of set the tone for the further detail. So that's kind of one of the things that I'm taking away from you and Ben and your conversation that I think we could integrate. Yeah. Anybody? Cassie?
Yeah, this is Cassie. I'm in current planning, so I'm one of the planners who does the design excellence reviews. And if any of you did want to, schedule that meeting to just give us a rundown of the intent and what you're going for, we'd be open to that. Once you've had that pre-app meeting, you're assigned a case planner, so you should be able to reach out to them, request a meeting, and go over that. That's something we can definitely do.
Great, thank you. So I saw David had a question on here and I wanted to address that. There are two sets of documents that you showed. One's in the Title 20 zoning code and then the other is the Design Excellence Manual. So as I would understand that, one is standard and one is guidelines. Is that correct? Could you guys talk about what the difference of those two documents are and why there's two different ones, I guess, and how they relate to one another?
That's absolutely right, Brian. There's and again here I'll would it help if it would help I'll put them up there again, but let's see. So this goes back to the kind of the strategy, that this was going to provide these two levels of these kind of two programs, I guess. One would be prescriptive standards, and one would be flexible guidelines. And so, just to find those, David, the manual, there's a link to the manual here. That's the design manual. That's the manual that includes the guidelines, which are qualitative and only apply during design excellence reviews, that kind of second tier of review. And then the approved ordinance includes, see if I can find it here. That includes this document here. This is the cover on that. And that was actually put right into the zoning code. So that's the same thing as 2041. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm crossing wires between design excellence and TEDS. That's the wrong link. Sorry, chapter 2025, 080. So starting here, it's an overlay. So it's put into the overlay chapter along with all the other zoning overlays that we have. And so, this chapter starts here, and like I said, it's a long document. So there's a lot to it that's in the overlay. But all of that is contained within these chapters 2025-080, and then 2025-081 are where you would find the specific standards for any of the downtown sub-districts, inner core, outer core, and 2025-082 are where you would find the standards for your corridor typologies. Again,
So is the main difference, you mentioned the design excellence manual is when you're going through the design review. So is the main difference based on that chart that you had, the design standards in Title 20 applies to all projects within the overlay, and then the standards apply when there's a review required?
Yeah, so this track here, the zoning compliance review, that's just typical zoning review, and that would include the standards in the 2025-080. So that would include the overlay standards, and then design excellence review. You know, this goes back to the table here that talks about thresholds for types of review, and at this point, you would also be using the design manual. And again, it's just kind of the basic idea is that you have this kind of two-tiered approach that, I don't know why that just did that, but you have a two-tiered approach where, and you know, how this was talked about during the, when this project was being developed was that, you know, there's kind of the scale that you know, is wanted on where on one end you have certainty on one end and you have creativity and flexibility on the other end. And the certainty is more easily met by providing, you know, these kinds of prescriptive standards where, you know, a building is no more than 200 feet wide and you know, at least this tall or not, you know, this close to the street or not you know, not any farther than this. And, you know, I imagine most of you find that constraining, and, you know, there's a reason that, you know, people kind of have trouble with kind of that typical zoning approach, which is that it can be kind of cookie cutter or, you know, constraining or not get to the intent that it's trying to achieve, because it's just limited to this yes, no, black and white type of approach on what it allows or doesn't allow. And so the design guidelines in the manual are meant to provide that approach where there is room for flexibility and some, you know, potentially better design and better, you know, that you can't just write down prescriptively beforehand, but it takes a little more understanding and talking through and figuring out. And so that's what the guidelines are meant to do, is to, you know, they're pretty, if you go through the guidelines, they're fairly basic, they're fairly simple, they're not in and of themselves very complicated, and they leave a lot open, I think. It's more a question of how you evaluate what that means in your specific context, meaning which sub-district and what the vision is for that sub-district and for what your project is. And then in between both of these is this whole thing about, or this whole opportunity for design variations. So design variations are when, you know, we have all of these design standards that are in the zoning, they're required, right, in the overlay. But through the design variation process, we can evaluate something different than that, that potentially is better and fits the project more, or fits what's being looked for. But it's still in line with the vision of the overlay because it's based on these guidelines that have been kind of set out in the design manual.
Okay, and then another question from David Gray was in regards to examples. Are there projects that, well, is this, first of all, I guess this process is public, these design review board meetings and reviews are open to the public, correct?
No, so let's come back to that. And just really quickly,
Okay.
For as far as seeing projects that have been constructed. You know, none of them are done. They're all still being constructed. The closest one that I've seen recently, I feel like that's getting close, is on Russell and Montana. There's a fishing guide shop, a fishing
Blackfoot Outfitters.
Yes,
Yeah.
Outfitters shop. Thank you. And that's getting pretty close. And I think is you can kind of see where how, you know, what it's headed towards. And you know, if you have any questions, I can try to list some of the projects, but you know, a lot of them are down the both the hotel, the second hotel next to the second hotel, and the remodeling of the Days Inn that's going to be called the Wren Hotel. Both of those went through Design Excellence. Jay did a project across the street from that'll be going up next to the Union Club. It's a remodel and addition. The
And what
hospital.
about that office building off of McDonald that Emily was working on? Where is that at?
Yeah, that is right behind Stockman's Bank. Tony worked on that.
But is it close to being finished or no? I know they had started construction.
Oh, Tony would know better than I would. But
True. That one might be getting close as well. There's an office building off of McDonald.
yeah, but anyway, there are, you know, they're out there, they're being built, but at this point we don't have very many, or any really that are done yet. And going back to the question of public, okay, so public reviews, you know, none of these projects have gone to the design review board. And, you know, part of that is that, and so that's where you would have a public meeting where you would get public comment. You could, and have a more, you know, formal and official, I guess, decision on some of these projects. The basically just, you know, to give the rundown on how that's put into the overlay. There's basically provision that, you know, any design excellence review can be done administratively. But if you know, if there's a reason, or for some reason staff wants to refer a project to the design review board, they can do that. If an applicant would rather go to the design review board, they can request that as well, or appeal. You know, if for whatever reason the administrative review is a denial or different than what is being applied for or wanted, you know, you can appeal to the design review board. And then there is a list of kind of 4 or 5 criteria that kind of recommends when staff might refer something. You know, we've tried to manage these administratively. Our kind of assumption is that the preference is for administrative review. If that's not the case, we definitely would love to, or, you know, want to hear more about that. And just in general, kind of what role you think the DRB should or should not play in this. You know, the committee that we were talking about earlier, that's not a, you know, it's not open to the public really. It's an informal thing. It's more, honestly, it's been more about internally educating ourselves and getting up to getting proficient with implementing this, and that seemed like the way to do it, to have kind of a group that we could check in with and talk things through. I definitely hear Brandon's you know, concern about that, and maybe question of whether there's more room for participation with that. And so that's something we'll probably be talking through. You know, our model right now is basically that you have a case planner or project planner, and they're really the point person. They'll bring something to that group if they have something they want to work through. Usually it's something specific. It's not to go through an entire project review. But also, you know, there are projects that might benefit from input from engineering and MRA and you know, the other agencies or departments, and so that project planner would be kind of responsible for assembling, you know, some kind of additional group members as necessary for a project.
So basically what you're saying is that architects need to design more controversial projects to
I wouldn't
have
say
it
that
go
we
to the
haven't
design
gotten
review board.
controversial projects, but
Well, Ben, this is Heather over at Homeward. As a developer, I'm also an architect, and I can't decide if smart enough or dumb enough to have gotten on design review board because I saw this coming. And we had a project come through the other night, and I'm going to ask Cassie. Can you remind me? Was that because these guidelines applied because it was because of they were doing a townhome project and
Or something regarding the townhouse standards.
Yeah. It was kind of related. Yeah, it was the townhouse standards, right?
Based on design standards, they were just a different set.
Right. So I will say, and I think I saw Karen ask the question, it wasn't pleasant, but we had a long discussion and I think we did a decent job. You said not to have opinions, but I have a visceral reaction when the garage door is the front of a house and there's no front door. But the developer got to work with the board and we asked for some things, and I'm not sure, Cassie, how you felt it went. We compromised and he's able to hopefully move forward. It's not perfect, but it was kind of a hybrid applied process.
Yeah,
And he
I
chose.
thought it went really well. I thought it was great that you guys got to work with the developer and kind of try to reach a middle ground between what they saw as their design vision and what these standards were trying to achieve. So I really like that you guys work together on that.
Well, I think he's okay. I mean, it was a little tricky because he just didn't know what and I apologize. There's some guy with a weed eater outside my window, so I'm sorry about the noise. He should have read the guidelines, but we worked with him and I think they have a plan forward. And it wasn't complicated, but it was the first bite at the apple of processing a request to change a variance. And you guys as staff can't do that or shouldn't do that. As a developer, I want it to be really predictable. So I think in theory, it's going to go okay.
yeah,
Great.
I mean, I think, we have some questions and things we're kind of wondering about with the design review board for these projects especially, partly because there's so much to look at. And so, one of the things we've been talking about is whether there's room to, use the DRB, but not for the entire project. Maybe there's just a specific kind of element that, we're unable to resolve administratively. And that's something that there would be a preference to just have the DRB be the deciding arbiter on that. And so that's one option that we're kind of thinking about. David Gray asked about the process, and it is kind of across the board. There's some projects that are straightforward and it's pretty quick, and there are other projects that can take a while but a lot of what that is the back and forth of kind of, I wouldn't say that the length of time on our end that is that adds to the time is the review itself as much. When we get busy, it's difficult at times, and we totally acknowledge that. But I think that the harder part about this is that there is kind of an element of negotiation or an element of working together to come to a solution. And so there have been some projects where there's been some back and forth, and without necessarily finding an easy answer. And so my question about that is whether, maybe in some cases there's a preference on the part of the applicant to use the DRB because at least it's a set timeline, and there's you have an expectation that, difficult or not, you're going to go to this board and they're going to evaluate a project and make a decision rather than kind of things potentially stretching out over the longer term, but through the administrative conversation. So that's another thing to think about.
And it would be really nice to be able to, kind of talk through, and I really appreciate, Brian, you guys setting this up, because my fear would be that you know, all we do is people get really reactive and they don't want to deal with your standards. So they're just going to go through design review board and hope they get, you know, something through that because they just didn't want the inconvenience because it's so difficult to deal with the standards. I think it really should be for those minor adjustments, or if there's something you can't do as staff that makes the project better, that you can bring there and have that discussed or, you know, debated. I'd say I wouldn't leave it all on, I mean, yes, there's some good people, but a lot of on the design review board, but that's still subjective. And so we talked when I first started design review board about you guys taking a project, and I realized they're literally under construction, but I'm kind of taking it apart, and you know, once it's done, be like, okay, how'd that go? What worked, what didn't work, and kind of doing that back and forth. And I think we're doing a little bit of that today, but it's like, we can just make the process better next time. You know, like, it's like, and you guys are doing your best too, because nobody wants to box people in as standards, but you want to give enough framework for people to be creative and then come up with a solution and back and forth. And I just think, you know, doing kind of a post-mortem on a project once it's all the way through, maybe that's a good exercise just to kind of see the pieces, and not just standard run it through design review board, because not everybody actually understands architecture and all the pieces. I mean, it's a bunch of different lenses that are good, but that's a risk too. So
yeah, and I mean, there's a question there of what is, I mean, aside from kind of the, you know, anything else within the, as an architect, you know, is there a preference there, or is it, I mean, you know, we have had several projects that have kind of gotten to a point where, you know, we haven't really been able to meet a, or get to a solution and have brought up the possibility of going to DRB or recommended it. And, you know, we have not gotten an actual project that thought that was the preferable way to go. And so, yeah, if there's reasons for that too, that, you know, we would be interested in.
I think as a former design review board member, I used to be on, I'm not any longer. It makes me a little bit nervous that architecture would be reviewed by the design review board unless there is a majority of architects on that board. Because currently Heather, formerly myself, Ryan, who's a landscape architect, I think those are the only three.
yeah, Jacob had,
Jacob moved.
he moved, yeah.
And so I think it's super important, and I know Laval's probably sick of me saying this, but I think it's super important that designers and architects are on that board if that's the path. I think it needs to drastically shift, and I say that because I'm not on the board anymore, so I don't have any vested interest, but I just want to make it known again is that that's a slippery slope to be to go down if there's not a good quality board intact.
Well, and the board itself, that it's a new thing for the design review board, because it used to be sign, it was only signs, right? So now when you're looking at the board complexion, I think that should be a priority, and I'm not sure how city boards can do that, but I agree with you, Brandon, that it's important. A planning background, architecture and engineering. Oh, Maria Chestnut is on there too. She's an engineer. So I do think the people that have been brought on have that experience. It's why I volunteered to do it, because you know, this should work well, and you want to have that, you want to have professional expertise on the board, because they are debating, and like I said, it was uncomfortable. We kind of got through some things, but I think the project that came out of that TED, it's not perfect, but it's better than it was proposed, if that counts. So at least that's my opinion.
All right, there was another question from Karen on how much pushback you're getting from architects on the design overlay in terms of feeling restrictive. Has there been some and maybe it's coming more from clients or developers or contractors more than architects, but just in general, it sounds like you've had conversations with the mayor on some things, or he's been hearing some feedback. So maybe just general overview of that.
Before you get into that question, I just wanted to, this is a great conversation about design review board, and I really appreciate it. And we know there's more work to do. And I think that we have pivoted a little or stalled a little bit while we've been in this pandemic mode, where there weren't meetings. And I mean, it was right about the time when we were starting to talk about this education format that you're hosting, and we hope to take further. And it was right about the time when the city council had DRB applicants in front of them. And they still have to go back to that. They still have work to do on the DRB postings. And so I'm hoping that that gets, that we get some of that kind of cleared up and cleaned up, because we kind of got halfway through it with the last appointments, as you mentioned, Heather, and a few others. But yeah, we've got more work to do on that. And you know, we set up our code and our bylaws for strengthening and creating a majority of that design professional. But we, so we're in the process of that right now. I think there's probably even advertisements out there, and I'm really sorry to folks that have experienced this delay. They're very interested in getting back on that now, I guess I could say. We also have the idea of continuing education to do with this recording as a template and a way to kind of build off of it and share and take it to the DRB. That was one of the ideas we had been exploring. So I just wanted to tell you, I hear what you're saying and sympathize, and you know, we're working on it. It's just taking, some of these things are taking a lot longer.
Nothing like a solid pandemic change in scope and all the things that had happened just to make it complicated, Lavelle, and the fact that you guys are rebuilding staff. So, I mean, we have to recognize as the development community that you guys were drinking out of a fire hose there for a little while. But my experience currently, I've been really pleased with working with Cassie and Emily and the team. I mean, you guys are building back up, and right now we can have momentum, and you might as well start doing some of the trainings now while we're trapped and can't travel for work and can pay a little more attention. I think it's an opportunity. So staff have been behind the 8 ball from the staffing capacities. So, and you guys are getting back up. It's good. It's good timing now.
Yeah, and we've got some amazing staff with us right now. We're really lucky. And anyway, I just wanted to sort of share with you where things are at. Anything else, Ben, on the DRB, and then it could.
Yeah, I was just gonna follow up that Heather, where one of the reasons that I was excited to do this event was, we've been talking about when are we going to get around to doing an update and a check-in to DRB and to City Council, and so I'm hoping to use this as kind of a springboard and just kind of see if we can get we're building towards that. It's been on our list, and so hopefully you'll be hearing more. And part of that too would be another if and when that would happen, that would be another opportunity for you and people in the design community and people in the community in general to make comments and to give more feedback to us and to electeds and that kind of thing. So be on the lookout for that.
Okay, so yeah, there's a couple of questions here. One was in regards to architects feeling restricted, and maybe this also rolls into another question here about projects being canceled because of it being in the overlay due to added costs. I know that you guys, that the team that put together the design standards reviewed kind of cost impacts to construction. But I don't know how realistic that was in our environment or whatnot. So I don't know, maybe this is more for some of the people that are on here that are architects that have clients that have gone through this, or maybe have decided not to move forward with the project because of it, which would be a pretty unfortunate thing. But David, it sounds like you've had a client that decided to not do a project because it was in the overlay. And I don't know if that's related to design costs, to basically, it is added cost, I would imagine, to our fee structure, because we have to it's another step that we have to provide information for and go through. And then also another, it could be added cost to building costs. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but it could be. And can
I just follow on that and just kind of expand it a little bit too, that, you know, we are, as part of that, would just want, you know, if there are specific standards that are especially problematic consistently, you know, that's something we would want to hear about as well. So yeah, curious to hear feedback.
Yeah, and that's kind of on my questions too. Is there specific standard guidelines that that are cost prohibitive that you have seen that come in at? David, did you want to talk to that a little bit in your experience, just to share what was going on with you, or your client specifically?
Yeah, what we ran into is in the initial planning of it, basically the amount of windows compared to what market rate rentals would have, and then the upgrade of the sidings for what was required, going to all brick in the front. It stopped the job right there. There was no way they would ever be able to get it to pencil out.
David,
So I was curious if other people
downtown?
run into that. It was downtown.
Yeah, figured.
So I was just basically trying to get a survey if anyone else has run into it, or is there enough people even have enough experience with it yet to even comment?
I have not personally, and I'm not aware of any projects. And I work for Cushing Carroll, and I'm not aware of any projects that I've had that issue with. But I do work with multifamily projects, and I know, Heather, you do a lot of that development, and that can be, you know, when you're dealing with a project of that scale and you're trying to do an affordable project in a downtown district or something, I could see how that could be problematic in that instance.
I mean, cost is absolutely always a concern. We only have so many resources, but I'm equally passionate about not building trash. So it's like, I say that glibly, but I mean, as long as we have an open dialogue, what we're doing today and what triggers more cost or what doesn't, I think that's important, you know, as we evolve the standards possibly. And I don't know if that's can be that Pollyannish. It's, you know, how the sticks and bricks go together, the volumes and shapes are not more expensive. I mean, some things will be. So I don't want that to be, I have a fear of that being used as a red herring. They say, oh my God, they just blow up the costs. But I do think there's real times when they do. And so having a safe place to be able to say what is causing those cost increases and what not would be important for us to all share. So I hope people are willing to do that. Sometimes I find that's not necessarily true with our group, but I do think that we all do care. So if you come from a good place.
Any other architects that have experienced that issue?
You know, this is my just opinion about it. I don't think the process on the design side actually cost my two clients that much money. I think overall the process was fairly smooth. There was some discussion, some dialogue, some back and forth, and then ultimately some decision was made. You know, I can guarantee you I spent less than 30 hours total, probably more like 15 or 20 hours total on the whole thing. And so I think that's a fairly cost that can be built into some of our fees pretty efficiently. The one comment I would have about we're talking about brick downtown, and I understand that rule within the design guidelines, why it's there and why we love our downtown so much. It's traditionally masonry, but certainly there are other materials that can relate to a character, our eclectic downtown character, other than what maybe is described in the design guidelines. And I got tripped up on that on one project. And I feel that although 90% of the time I would say, yes, brick downtown if you can afford it, I think there's other materials that could be considered towards that scale, that texture, that proportion, that honesty of material. And I feel that, you know, what I don't want is these guidelines to then stifle creativity. It's supposed to foster the good design and not tamp down the creative part. It's supposed to weed out the bad projects, but honor and foster the really creative ones. And so that's the challenge, and that's the conundrum with the challenge that the staff has with this is how do you judge those projects between this project really is trying to do it the cheapest, the fastest, and hire the worst architect, and this project is doing the exact opposite of that. They're trying to do quality materials. Their heart is in it. They want, they're part of the community, those sort of things. And so there needs to be a level of conversation with staff to say, what kind of project is this? What are their hearts there? And I think that's an important, design is such an emotional based profession. And going back to the being able to pitch the design to staff, I think this is equally as part of it. Is it's not prescriptive. It's not A plus B equals C. There's something really intangible about it. And so, going back to the brick thing downtown, again, it's a slippery slope. You want to encourage those honest materials downtown that speak to the character, but I don't think that just masonry and just a natural stone is the only solution downtown.
Brandon, I would agree with you on that, and I apologize. I've not memorized every zone and have not developed downtown lately. So I think John Paoli's project right there on Front Street is a prime example of that, metal complementing the brick. And so if it is limited and you have to use a masonry or stone product, adding a few more things into the kitty to be creative would be nice, because but you're right, it's a very fine line, a delicate dance to walk. But I think carefully looking at each of I don't remember what they're called, the different levels or the different zones, be important to put some flexibility in there if we could.
Yeah, I would add too that just because a project has a smaller budget doesn't necessarily mean that you can't come up with a design solution that still meets the intent. And I think that's where the design review board, going back to that, in my opinion, that's where the teeth is. That's where you give them the ability to analyze that and be able to determine whether or not that even though the design doesn't have the specific material that's called out here, or maybe it doesn't have the percentage of glazing, does it still embody the design intent of what that standard is or guideline is trying to meet? So
can I jump in on that?
Yeah.
Too? I just wanted to first of all say I think the materials specifically is and this is kind of where I'm at with it currently, is that it is one of the hardest to evaluate, but I also really think I'm have been convinced that it is important and plays a vital role in design. It was probably the most controversial standard, at least, that was included in this. But I just think after having seen projects coming through and seeing where they end up, that it just makes it's an important component of the design. That being said, I just want to kind of run down again how we evaluate design variations, because I think it's just to be clear about that and to throw it out there, that the way that we look at the design variation, which again it's basically a administrative variance from a zoning standard. So one of the zoning standards is materials, right? You have a certain percentage of brick, or you have a certain percentage of traditional materials, or something like that, or all these other standards. So if when you request a design variation, whether it's materials or something else, part of what that does is it allows us to evaluate a different design approach or technique based on the project comprehensively. So when we look at that design variation, it's not, is it this material or that material, or is it this distance from the street or that distance from the street. It's really based on what the overall design is, and either how the alternate design component fits in, offsets, or is as good or better as what was originally required, or how does it fit into the rest of the design in meeting these these overarching guiding principles or key applicable key considerations and things like that. So I know that's kind of maybe confusing or vague, but part of what I think is a powerful thing about how this is set up is that it really it provides it provides the designer to really be creative and find ways to meet their design goals in various ways, and it gives us on the review level a way to really kind of not be tied down to this kind of reviewing the specific is it or isn't it kind of review, which is how a lot of other zoning review works.
Ben, I think that's a really good example. I'll keep going back because I've only done the one with the townhome piece. But I did take a development project through Whitefish and their design review board and the process, and it was easy in the sense that we were asking for some variances specifically. It went to the board, we explained why, and staff recommended the variances, nodded to the fact that our project met their overall intent. And then the board, asked some very detailed questions, but we were able to present and they accepted it and moved forward. So if trust can be built, because I would go back through design review board in Whitefish again because they were logical and it made sense, and it was a positive experience. I think if we can do that here between staff, design review board, the design world, and the developers, instead of it just being, oh my God, I don't know this and I don't want to do it. I think if there's trust built and you say, oh, I want to do my project and I articulate my 3 variances and staff, support that or want to leave it to the design review board to go through, then it becomes not all the way predictable, but confident that it'll get through. And that's how you use the process to make it work.
Absolutely. And I think that's definitely what we want to develop with you all and with other, anyone else who's, bringing projects through this is that trust, and that we want to be consistent and dependable and reasonable and all that. The thing that I would say for that, especially with regard to consistency, is that, what we want to be consistent about is basing decisions and determinations on the materials in the design manual and in this, in the standard. We want to rely on the materials in our evaluation. And so that's which, basically is that I don't think that we can guarantee that if we approve a design variation for one project, we will always approve that design variation every time it comes up, because it's a different project in a different place. But we'll evaluate it using the, based on the same materials as they apply and under the same kind of directives.
Well, and precedent was a big part of our conversation the other night, because we didn't really want to give on a few things, but we didn't want to create a precedent that wasn't based on the global picture. We didn't want that to open a door for just everybody to go through a variance and not have to have their front door facing the street, that kind of thing. So I think it's important that you are looking at it that way. So I appreciate that. Case by case basis.
All right.
Then,
Oh, go ahead.
Hi there.
oh, go ahead, Jay.
I've taken a couple projects through, and I have to say, I think that I've had a good experience with it, and the reviews were comprehensive and really helped me to move along. However, I have to say that I think some of the prescriptive requirements are overbearing. The big one that just I have a hard time understanding why it came along is the 8-foot spacing on windows. If you, on the second level, sometimes if you have rooms that makes a medium size, a 12-foot size room, you can't really, if it is in the wrong place, you can't really have 2 windows in it, but the window ends up being right in the middle of the wall. And I think there needs to be some more flexibility in that whole thing. And the other thing that I've been wanting to say is I've have so much compassion for the folks that have been reviewing this. They've been on the same learning curve that we as architects have been on, and it seems like things are moving along, and especially now that there's more staff on board, that's going to make a huge difference. And so I'm interested to find out, basically, one of the things that David was asking about is the time frame. How long normally can we start to think? I mean, my clients are saying, how long is this going to take? And I need to be able to give them some type of an estimate as to, you know, whether we want to go forward with the project or not. And I have had a project that they decided not to go forward with because they're worried about the time frame. And so, can you speak to that a little bit, Ben? I know you spoke once before about it.
Yeah, I'll speak, and then I'd like to kind of open it up to the other planners here who have done more of these projects. But the one thing that I would say about that, Jay, and thank you for saying that earlier, that was, we really appreciate that. We're really lucky to have the planners working with us that we do now. They're doing a great job. And but I would, you know, regardless of how long a project, you know, different projects will take different amounts of time. I just want to, I guess, throw out the idea that there, some of these projects, or I guess I hope that it's taken as a benefit that you know, this review can be done administratively. I think that, and that it typically is, you know, there is the possibility that things will get kind of bogged down, or that there's some back and forth or disagreement that is going to push that timeline back. And you know, I'm happy to talk about that more, about how we can make that go smoother or better. You know, some of our experience on that is that you know, it takes time to review, it takes time to, and then after a response, it takes time for you or the architect to go to work through with the client on that end, maybe what a response is. And one thing we've been doing is trying not to be prescriptive about changes that we want made specifically. That seems more in line with the spirit of this, which is that, you know, it's meant to allow for creativity and flexibility on your part. And so as much as we've been able, you know, we've tried to hold back from saying like, just do this, or you know, if you do that, you know, that would be fine, but maybe that would be more helpful. I don't know. You know, I'd be kind of curious to hear more about that, but in general, just, you know, again, maybe one benefit is that, you know, this is at least a process that doesn't involve a public hearing and a public meeting timeline necessarily. But I'd open that up to Emily and Cassie and Caitlin and see if you have any thoughts on that.
I have one quick question on that before we go to them, if you don't mind. In the review process, does this overlap with the, and this is just me not knowing, but I've worked in other jurisdictions where this does happen, where the design review can overlap with the building permit review. And in that case, it helps to shorten the timeline, although you have to make changes potentially to the design, but usually it's not a permit issue, a building permit issue or building code issue.
We started that way, and I think just at a department level, there was a decision to wait on reviewing building permits until this has been done, and that's because it caused some real real headaches, challenges, frustration on all sides. Our kind of line when this was adopted was the attempt was to not slow down the process and offer at least concurrent reviews, trying to make it clear that there's a risk in doing that, that if as part of the design excellence review, changes are or modifications come out of that, then that's going to affect the building permit and the building permit review. And so that came up. We got a lot of building permits submitted and then went through design excellence review, and then those building permits had to be changed. And so it just seems like, well, at this point, the department's approach is to hold on building permits until design excellence review.
And to go off of that,
If I might jump in on that one too, the cost of getting to the building permit stage is so much greater than the cost to my clients of being able to do the design review, which is somewhere in between preliminary plans and design development. And so from that point of view, I'd strongly counsel that we keep it the way that it is.
and to add to that too, part of why we would like you guys to hold off on submitting building permits until after design review is sometimes it does, the building footprint does get modified, things get moved around. Landscaping gets changed, engineering looks at that in part for their review for snow removal or drainage issues. So if other departments start reviewing the permit before we finish the review, you're going to need a revision likely, and then you're just causing other departments to have to review projects twice instead of once. So it just saves time across the board for us to get through the design excellence review beforehand.
So one way I've seen that approached, like in Denver, I would say, is that the pre-app is required, and that's at like a schematic level of drawing, so that your kind of footprint is pretty close to being set at that point, generally speaking. And once you and they review it they have I would say that their requirements for that pre-app is pretty it's pretty comprehensive, but the pre-app meeting then allows you to be comfortable moving forward into that overlapping of that next level. And then they allow you to overlap that next level, and there's not usually a lot of building adjustments overall or landscaping adjustments overall at that point. But that's just a general way that I've seen that approached.
Well, on the flip side, for what you said about staff and Cassie about having to go backwards, the architects and engineers don't want to have to, all the trades, are you kidding me? You should be able to submit your application at schematic design development right in there. Stop moving walls, right? This is what I'm always told is on the development side, so that the design team can go. I'd be crazy not to get design review approved at that phase and then let my team go. From a cost standpoint and logistics standpoint, it doesn't make sense for the review staff at the city level or the A&E team in any way, in my mind, from the development standpoint.
I can share my 2 pieces of advice that I have given applicants that I've worked with. Number one is, like was mentioned, we do have the option to do pre-application meetings. And I really like sharing that option and strongly recommend them, just so that when we do have that preliminary meeting, you can kind of lay out what the expectation is, and that helps guide maybe what the time frame might be, how complicated this project is. That gives staff expectations for what this project will entail, and in turn, we can give the applicants a more realistic idea of how this will go. And then at that point, we can catch any like huge red flags or things like that, or things that might make it more complicated. In terms of timeline, it's really a project by project thing. It's pretty hard to estimate, and I think it is based on how complicated the project is, how many variations the applicant is seeking, because that adds a new level of, or new layer of review, things like that. So I don't know, I think from our standpoint, we want to provide you with realistic expectations, but it's really dependent on what's going on in the specific project, case by case.
I guess I'll go with like the best design excellence. My reviews that I've done in terms of timeline, my past two were like multi-dwelling, both were about 10 to 12 units. And they each had 1 or 2 variations, and it took like a month. And that like includes like the time between, like the time from submittal to approval. So I would say that's like the fastest we're cranking them out is like a month.
I've been telling my clients that it's a 4 to 6 month process, and so that's
Yeah,
what my
and Jay,
experience is.
you've been involved with one of the ones that's taken by far the longest, unfortunately.
I realize that.
But sorry, Cassie, just to jump in here too. One of the best ways for us to make things go quick on our end is to have it meet the standards. That would be our advice. And then I'm a little surprised I haven't heard anything about the checklist yet. But again, if you have it filled out and it has the addresses the guidelines, we want it as much to be based on the manual as possible, and as much to just kind of illustrate for us what where we need to find the design element and why it meets the guidelines. And it can be pretty fairly quick on our end to review it, and then if best case scenario there's not any or much modifications needed, and it could go relatively fast. It's when we get into missing materials, or we need more, or we need want to see modifications. That's where the time starts to add up, I would say.
All right, we got a couple of people that haven't had a chance to speak yet. So Tony, I see your hand is raised. Would you like to chime in here?
Can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I've done a couple projects through this process. It's been great both times. Staff's been really easy to work with. Had a couple variation requests. In terms of those, I think you have opportunities to vary from design standards, which is great, and I haven't had any problems with that. I think my biggest question, and I've raised this with other staff, some of the staff members, and going forward here, and I guess we're going to be reaching this point pretty soon, is enforcement. I work with developers. We all work with developers who will love to, throw a curveball at you at the end of the project, and wow, that's not the material we drew originally. What happened there? Materials suddenly don't become available anymore. If you want to vary from what you originally submitted during the construction process, or if you drive by and they have put a completely different material on the building now, it's all of a sudden. I'm wondering how you guys are going to be handling that moving forward, because I'm sure you're going to be coming across it.
And we did with you, I believe, Tony.
I'm not saying names, Ben.
No, that's a great question. And yeah, if, other planners speak up if you have ideas. I think that it's, just for one thing, we have received, basically the way we've been handling modifications or changes after there's been an approval is that unless we kind of find that it's a very, like, what's the right word? De minimis change.
Egregious.
Yeah, well, an egregious
Drastic.
change. Where we require another round of design excellence review, and we look at the change, and then it's got to get filtered through the permit process. But that's kind of what we've been doing, and we'll probably continue doing.
I guess what I'm more concerned or preparing you guys for is the we've already completely clad the building, and
yep.
What are you going to do? You can make them pull that off the building. You're going to have a fight on your hands. So I'm just I don't know if it's site visits, incremental site visits during construction to make sure that things are kind of happening the way they're supposed to be happening, or what it is. But if you guys just show up at the very end to see how it turned out, you're going to get surprised, I think, from time to time.
Thank you. And if any of you who have worked in other places have advice on that, we're
It's a really reasonable question, and it already happens sometimes as you guys are issuing permits that the inspectors are not on the same page, because we get called for things that were clearly, we were told one thing and then the other. And now you've added another layer of complexity, because the design review process and the design excellence, you have to make sure they show up in your permit review, but now you have to have them show up in the field. And so I think it's just going to take time for the different staff that do those different components, especially the inspectors, because if it's required by permit, they damn well better be in the field, and that's when the inspectors can hold the line. So yeah, cladding the whole building, then somebody wasn't paying attention. But I mean, I get your example, Tony. It's going to be tough, but you're going to have your inspectors be familiar.
We've actually been discussing this lately, since we're kind of at the point where the first round of design excellence projects are getting ready to be inspected. So we're kind of in the stage of figuring out exactly how that's going to look.
I can't wait for the plumbing inspectors to have to look for pretty things on the building. So it'll be entertaining.
They probably won't be looking for that, but we're going to be working with our code compliance just to figure out what this will look like. So I don't know how that will go. I guess just try and build your buildings the way that they're permitted, and that'll be the easiest option. But
I wish it were that easy.
Yeah,
right.
it's sometimes just not in our control.
Absolutely, like things come up, cost change. So we're kind of, those discussions are happening internally right now too. So if you have any feedback or ideas.
There will be bad players. I sympathize with the architects that have clients that intentionally don't do the right thing. So you're going to have to solve for kind of the spectrum of oops, to, like the signs that got installed at Bone and Joint that we had to go back and retroactively approve the other night, to the egregious, as we said. So
I
and
think
that's an unfair position to put a DRB or inspectors in, is to be the person telling them, take all that material off your building, because that's not what you guys are supposed to put up. So it's not fair.
For this whole process to work, I feel like you really have to hold the line, and that's going to be tough. There's going to be lawsuits and all kinds of stuff about that, but it's just going to have to happen.
All right. So we haven't heard from Tom or Heather Stockton. I wasn't sure if you guys wanted to have a chance to chime in here. We've got about looks like we have about 6 minutes left, so not a whole lot of time here, but I don't know if you guys have anything to add. Tom or Heather?
I don't. This is Tom. I don't. I've just been listening because I've another project, which is the Mullen Area Master Plan, which is going to bring us a form-based code for that area, and I just was interested in hearing how this code, which is very close to what a form-based code is, and how the development community and architects were feeling about it, and what was working and not working. And so I've just been taking some notes, and I don't have anything to add, but appreciate everybody's thoughts.
Yeah, I think in general, I think for a lot of us, we've probably worked in other jurisdictions where these have been adopted for a long time, and we're kind of used to having to go through the process. At least for me, I've worked even in Missoula on many projects, so I think that helps give us a little bit of experience with form-based codes and design guidelines in general.
I think you're speaking to familiarity, Brian, and so you're used to it. And I think I'm married to somebody who said a lot of not nice things about the forms and the filling it out when it first came out, and they actually really care about design, and now it's like no problem. It's just a familiarity of how to get the information done right. And when you're breaking trail, it's going to take longer, but once you're into a more routine, I agree to Brandon's point, the fees aren't going to be that much more. You know how to step through the process, and Tom, I'm really excited that you guys are going to do the form-based code out there. I actually stepped out of this meeting and multitasked with a subdivision meeting I had with Dave, and we were just outside your boundary. But it would have been great to have that to consider for that area because it really needs it.
I just wanted to add that I put the link for Clifton Park form-based codes at the top of this conversation. That was also designed by Dover Cole, and it's a really great set of code. So it might be inspirational or helpful, and it might be possible to grab some of their illustrations as well because we're working with them. And they make things so clear with those illustrations that it does cut out some of that verbiage that Ben was talking about earlier that kind of was trying to streamline. So there might be some opportunities there.
Karen, this is Tom again. Karen, sorry to get too far off track here, but that code, the first draft is on the project website, which is mullinareamasterplan.com, and I will write it into the chat here. But okay. I'll be curious to see. I already took down the address you gave me for that other code. So
okay, yeah.
And, I'll be curious to see what you think about this one.
Okay, cool. Yeah, the beginning of the, if you scroll through that code pretty quickly, you get to lots of illustrations, and then it becomes kind of simplified. So it's fun to look at, and I'll look at yours too. And thanks. I'm excited you guys are doing FBCs. I think that's the way to go. I've been thinking that for years, so I'm excited.
Yeah, and Heather said it really well here, and that we're growing up as a city. We're going to need to have a little bit more sophisticated types of tools to use, and it's never easy to learn new stuff. It's going to be a learning curve, but I think the results are really good. And actually, if I did have one comment, and it might have been Heather that you mentioned it, was that conducting a couple of post-mortems on some of the projects, that's one of my favorite things to do in an office after the project is over. I think those are really valuable, and I'd be, I don't know how that could be done, maybe just informally, but I think those are great tools for learning as well.
Yeah, learning what you did right and what you did wrong, or what was complicated or whatnot. I just think it would help us all.
Yeah, and the Dover Cole, that we have that access to them. I mean, those guys wrote the book on FBCs, and they're a great resource. So that's so great that they're working with Missoula.
All right, we're coming up on 5 o'clock here, so that's our time here. I wanted to thank you all for participating. This was a great discussion. Ben, do you know where we're going to make this video available?
I don't, but I am definitely interested in that and making it, sending it out to people that might be interested, or putting it somewhere where people can find it. So
okay,
I can talk more about that after this.
So we'll be in contact. Maybe we'll have the development services group, the planners, send something out, since your group is a little bit bigger than mine, I believe, and probably covers most of my people as well, or most of my email list. So if you're interested in anything else, or being on kind of the list for the Missoula Architecture Design group as well, you can email me or Ben. I think my email was in the invite for this meeting, so you should be able to email me if you're interested in kind of being on our list. As I mentioned in the beginning, we're just kind of a liaison between the community and architecture and design group, community in general, and we have representation on our board from I think 5 or 6 different architecture firms, architecture and designers. So that's what we're about. This is the type of stuff that we hope to help bring to the community in general. We have the other stuff going on that I mentioned in the beginning with the ZAC in the next month or so. So encourage you to participate. And if you need more information, please feel free to email me or get on the Zach Facebook page or website. So other than that, that's all I got. Ben, do you have anything else to add?
I just want to say thank you for this opportunity to you, Brian and Karen, for reaching out. And you know, we don't get to have these conversations very often, but I think they're really helpful and constructive, and we all work together, and we'll be doing that for the foreseeable future. And so I really appreciate the opportunity, and look forward to talking about it more as it goes forward.
All right. Nobody else has? Yeah, thank you.
Can I
Yeah.
plug? It seems
Yeah.
like this is the time to plug collaboration and projects. We're also doing an update to the Title 20 amendments. So if you've got any comments on that, I think Brian, we might have sent along the process, the project to you for dissemination. So it's up on the Engage Missoula website also. And it's a combination of amendments in several different sections of the code. So you have to kind of look around it to see if there's things in there that look like we're on the right track, or if you have any concerns about.
Great.
Comments are due about, well, tomorrow.
I do remember sending that out, but yeah, I can resend it maybe if I can resend it as letting everyone know when the deadline is.
Sure, and we continue to receive comments, but just sort of a first cut at it while we work on getting it ready for planning board is why we have that deadline.
Okay.
So thank you.
Great. All right. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate you participating.
Yes.
Have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.